Hey, welcome back to my channel. If you are new here, then my name is Erica, and today I'm going to talk about the podcast Something Was Wrong. So a few years ago, I forget what video I did this on, but I talked about some of the ethical true crime podcasts that I enjoy, and I included Something Was Wrong on the list. And now I'm kind of regretting that. And so I think it is important for me to talk about this since I did plug it on my platform, even though I know the podcast is a lot more well known than I am, but still I feel like it is my responsibility as a content creator to acknowledge when something I endorse becomes problematic. So if you don't know what Something Was Wrong is, it is a podcast that mostly focuses on victims of abuse and scam artists and all types of things like that. So, and it is hosted by somebody named Tiffany Reese, and I'll get more into Tiffany Reese later on in this video, but I really liked the podcast because it allowed people to tell them. So I really liked that the podcast allowed people to share their own stories and their own voices. But recently, I've noticed a lot of things, and I went on Reddit and I saw a lot of opinions because I hadn't been caught up on the most recent season, which I believe is season 17, but I could be totally off there. But anyway, so the new season, which I've listened to all three that have been out so far. I listened to the third episode this morning, and I might not listen to the rest of the season because it is a mess. So, if you don't know, so this season, and I would like to add a trigger warning here for child abuse and death because it is a horrific story, and I do believe that she should have put that trigger warning on episode 1 so they would know that listening to this season you're going to hear about this. Like, it's not enough to just put that warning on episode 3, which is the one that actually goes into it, but I think it should have been on season episode 1 too. But it is about a woman who worked in a NICU and adopted one of the children that was born to a mother who was addicted to drugs. So she adopted this child that had a lot of medical needs and support needs, and she dated this guy who was later responsible for this child's death. So I have a lot of feelings on this, some of which a lot of the people on Reddit share my thoughts, some not so much. But first of all, I do want to say that I don't believe Tiffany Reese should have platformed somebody that this happened to, and here's why. I think when you hear the details of the story, you feel differently because this guy she dated, who they used the pseudonym Cody, I don't know if that's his real name, but they call him Cody in the podcast, and he was accused of this beforehand, and then the woman who dated him knew that he was accused of things like this, like abusing children and just not being a great person, and yet she continued to let him in her life when she had adopted this child. So I think no matter what, in some way, she does have responsibility in that case. I would feel differently if he hadn't been accused of that before, and if she had no idea and this was just out of the blue. But also, her child mentioned that this guy was shaking him. So I think you should always listen to a child when they say an adult is doing something bad to them, because, well, you should always be err on the side of believing the child and getting the child out of a situation that could be potentially dangerous. Some of the other criticisms are that the one sister of the woman kept bringing up, oh, and he stole her TV too. And yeah, to me it did kind of seem like they were harping on that an unnecessary amount of time. It's like he killed this child that was your child, and you keep talking about him stealing a TV. To me, those two things are not even comparable. Like, you can buy a new TV, and I mean, yeah, it's a shitty thing to steal somebody's TV, and they're like, oh, and on top of everything he did, he stole our TV. Like, I think the amount of times they brought that up in the podcast was like, it made it sound like that was what they were really upset about, which I don't know if that's true. I hope they would care more about this child than they do about a stolen TV, but I don't know these people. But anyway, I'm gonna go on Reddit to see some of people's thoughts, because I think it's always good to read other people's opinions. So some other people are mad that, and I think it was 2 seasons ago now, she platformed a family vlogger, and if you watch my channel, you know how I feel that family vloggers exploit children. So a lot of the other criticisms towards this episode are not just this episode, but that Tiffany doesn't necessarily vet the people she puts on her podcast. She has platformed people that have been involved in MLMs and people that have like a lot of these stories that don't involve legal action. It can be very hard to prove. So sometimes she could be platforming somebody that is just mad at their ex or one of their old friends or a family member, and they could be making up or even embellishing a story that may be true, but adding little flares to add drama to it. And I just think you could get yourself into hot water when you are platforming these types of people, because it's impossible to vet a lot of them. But I feel like Tiffany doesn't always try. And this is what one editor named Nikki Parker wrote. And this post is titled TR, meaning Tiffany Reese could have reported this story in a respectful manner, but she chose not to. I'll admit, I didn't think she was that bad. Maybe because I have had time to deep dive into, maybe because I have not had time to deep dive into all her other BS yet, but this woman is everything y'all said and more. The reporting of this story isn't even the issue. She could have reported this as a cautionary tale and not allowed the gruesome, which is Leslie, the woman who adopted the little boy Jace, and her sister, are who they're calling the gruesome, to participate. But what she did, the way they are telling this story, is a choice, and I'm frankly disgusted. So I think a lot of the issue with letting Leslie tell this story is that she makes herself the victim. She makes herself the victim of this awful guy, Cody, and it's like, he manipulated me, he did, and I was this innocent person, when she said herself that she knew he had been accused of this behavior in the past and that her son had bruises on him, which I think is disgusting for you to then try to paint yourself as the victim. I also think, and another trigger warning for this is a mention of eating disorders. I also think Leslie told her story about having an eating disorder and went into graphic details, including like her lowest weight. That's not appropriate. If you read any guidelines for how to tell an eating disorder story without being triggering, you know not to add numbers to it or be like, I only ate this much or I exercised this much. And Tiffany Reese says she herself has struggled with an eating disorder, and if that's true, I do not know why she would allow that to be included in the episode. And the reason I bring up the whole eating disorder thing is I think this is more indicative of Leslie and her sister wanted this story to be about them, because that part of the story had nothing to do with Jace or Cody. And so if this is meant to be telling Jace's story and exposing Cody and the dangers of people that are manipulative, then why would you tell this whole backstory? Oh, when I was a teenager, I went through this. When, like, that's not super relevant to the story. And I mean, yes, one could argue she was more vulnerable because she went through this, but the amount of time she spent talking and going into detail about this, I don't think that's justified by, like, oh, well, this shows I was in a vulnerable place. Another thing is Leslie's sister was shot when she was a kid at a restaurant, and I really don't know how any of that was relevant to any of this story besides just them telling their life story and being like, oh, look at all these crazy things that happened in our life. And I think, so one thing I forgot to add is along the lines of Leslie talking about herself a lot is we don't hear a lot about Jace, and I know he was a baby pretty much, but at the same time, this is supposed to be about his story. But I've heard more about Leslie and her sister, and I just, to me it came off as tacky, and that she was the savior in this situation. It seems like from her account at least that she just rushed into adopting this child, and adopting a child is a very big commitment and a big responsibility. You don't just do it on a whim to feel good about yourself and be like, oh, I saved that kid, when really I think he would have been better off if she had not adopted him. I think he would have still been here today. And the word a lot of people use to describe this podcast is trauma porn, which basically means taking a lot of salacious details and packaging up a traumatic event in a way that'll be most interesting and entertaining to people. Like the way people can't look away when they see a car crash. I do think in a way people are morbidly fascinated with terrible events. And I don't know the answer to this, because I don't want to say that podcasts can't talk about trauma, but I do think it's getting to the point where a lot of these podcasts just kind of add more to this, when it could be more about spreading awareness and less about shock value. Like, oh my god, I can't believe somebody did that. I don't know the answer here. Another big criticism of Tiffany Reese and the Something Was Wrong podcast is that if you look on their social medias, at least on Instagram, both Tiffany and the Something Was Wrong podcast have disabled comments, meaning people cannot express how they're feeling about this. And if people can't do that freely, then like, what are they supposed to do? And that's why a lot of people have turned to Reddit, because they can no longer go on Instagram. And of course you can leave reviews on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, but if you're taking away somebody's ability to express their thoughts, they're gonna find another way to express it. And that's why I always say about YouTubers that will disable comments is you're only hurting yourself, because then people are gonna look elsewhere and they're gonna find people talking about this, and then they're gonna put their comment there instead. But also, then Leslie added the story of how she met her husband, and it's just this whole romantic thing, and she's all giddy about it and talking about this, when it's like, you literally 5 minutes ago just were talking about this very serious topic, and here you are again centering yourself and being like, see, life gets better, it did for me. And in some ways I do think you need to give people hope, but in other ways it's like, I don't think this is the time or place to do that. A lot of the other criticisms against this podcast is that a lot of times, although Something Was Wrong will use pseudonyms for a lot of the people involved, like, they don't try hard enough to conceal the identities, and people can easily find these people. Like, people tracked down the guy from season 1, and that brings about a lot of ethical concerns, because then people can harass them and send threats. And I know that a lot of these people are terrible people, but at the same time, we're only hearing one side to this story. So maybe things aren't what the podcast is portraying them to be, and I'm not saying that's the case, but it is possible. So when they don't try to conceal the person's identity, they kind of are asking people to go and harass them. Because even when you say, please don't harass any of the people involved, people are gonna do what they want to do. I also want to talk about how before each episode, Tiffany gives a disclaimer that the guests in the podcast and their opinions do not reflect her opinions or the opinions of the podcast. And now I call bullshit on that, because I think if you're platforming anybody, if you're allowing them to have a voice on your platform, you are endorsing that and saying it's okay to say this, unless you specifically say about a specific opinion or something, I don't condone this behavior. But you can't just have a blanket statement being like, oh, just because someone says something doesn't mean I agree with it. You have to be open to hearing people saying, oh, someone on your podcast said this, and this is why that's harmful. You can't just hide behind disclaimers. And I do get why they do that for like legal reasons, but at the same time, you need to stand behind what you're putting out there, and if you can't, then don't do it. A lot of the criticism towards Tiffany Reese has been that she isn't very responsive to criticism, which I'm not sure that I agree with. I mean, from what I'm seeing now with her not allowing comments, it does seem like she isn't allowing criticism. But I will say, this is my personal experience, but I don't want to dismiss any other experiences, but I'm just adding this because I do think it's relevant. But a few years ago, she made a post about eating disorders, and she used the phrase, I tried anorexia for years. So I commented on that as somebody who has struggled with an eating disorder, that using that kind of language is harmful, because an eating disorder is an illness. It's not something you try, it's not a fad, it's not a diet. And she was receptive to me, and she did end up rephrasing that and saying thank you for pointing that out. So I do think to some degree she can handle criticism. I just don't know why right now she's become so closed off to criticism. I don't know. Apparently the Facebook group for Something Was Wrong is a mess, and the Reddit, which wasn't the Reddit I just read off of, the Reddit the subreddit I was reading off of was the very unofficial Something Was Wrong Reddit, whereas there is an official one which apparently people can't really express themselves freely on. But again, I just wanted to share this because I have endorsed this podcast in the past, and also because I haven't seen people outside of Reddit talking about it. That's not to say nobody is, but I haven't seen it, so I wanted to put something out there where people could see what's going on and I could share my thoughts, because I don't know anybody else who in my real life who listens to this podcast, so there's no one I could really talk about it to, so I'm talking to a camera. But thank you so much for watching. If you learned something, please give it a big thumbs up. And if you have not already and you would like to see more of my content, please consider hitting that subscribe button down below. Thank you so much for watching again, and I hope to see you again next time. Bye.